In this lesson, we're going to be focusing on some consumer-oriented tools that allow you to remove red eye inside of an image and to recolor portions of an image. Now, as I say, they're aimed toward consumers, but they're so well implemented, in my opinion, that they're useful for professional users as well. But I'm going to be demonstrating how the tools work on a consumer-level photograph here. It's an image that my wife shot using an Olympus Stylus 410, which is a great little camera, and it's called redeyetry.jpg, and it's inside the Lesson 7 folder, which is inside the Part 1 folder, inside the Project Files folder that you copied from the DVD to your hard drive. I'd like you to go ahead and open that up. Now, this is an sRGB image, so if you open it up and you get a color warning, just click OK. I do want to draw your attention to something. Notice up here in the title bar how there's an asterisk. That tells you, by the way, not only do you see that this is an RGB image, and there's 8 bits of data per channel. We'll discuss that later. That's pretty advanced stuff. But there's a little asterisk at the end of it. If you don't see an asterisk, that means you're editing the image inside the same color space that you've selected. So that would be Adobe RGB for us. If you see the asterisk, then that means you're using a different color space. You're using the image's color space. And in our case, it turns out to be sRGB. If you see a little number sign, a little pound sign, that means that there is no color profile associated with the image whatsoever, and it's just defaulting to whatever you've selected, which would be Adobe RGB. Just worth noting, in case you ever look to the title bar, it's not necessarily anything you need to do with this information, but just in case you're looking at the title bar and you're wondering what the heck's going on, that's what's going on. Okay, now, this image happens to be of my 2 sons bookending this terrified cousin in the middle here. And they all have red eye. Notice if we zoom in here on Sammy, for example, you can see that he's got red pupils. And what that's caused by, basically, is the flashes entering the eye and then bouncing off the back of the retina into the lens element. So this happens when the flash and the lens element are very close to each other on a camera, which happens with consumer cameras. Also, it tends to happen in dark environments more than light environments when the pupils are dilated. And it just so happens that when you light up the retina and you look at it from a distance, inside human beings, that retina tends to look red. That's just the way it looks. Because of the capillaries and some other stuff. Who knows why? I'm not Mr. Science. The little baby, he's got some red eye too. Not so much in this eye as this eye, but he's got it. And then Max has got the most of all of them because he's looking off to the side so we can see his side retina, don't you know? Don't know if that's redder or not, but he's got redder eyes. Now, something else I want to show you here. I'm going to go up to the File menu, and I'm going to choose the File Info command, which you can also get to by mushing your fist on the modifier keys and pressing I. And the File Info command brings up this big old dialog box full of all kinds of stuff about a file. Now, the very first panel of information isn't too helpful. It tells me that it came from an Olympus digital camera, and you can change it to anything you want. If you don't want to advertise Olympus or what have you, you can delete it. And this is information that's actually saved in the metadata of the file. What's more useful, though, is right here, Camera Data 1, and sometimes Camera Data 2 has some useful info. But if I go back to Camera Data 1, almost every camera saves metadata along with it that tells you, for example, what model of camera you used to shoot the image. And in this case, it could be one of 3 models. This happens to be a Stylus 410, as I said. It tells you exactly the date on which the photograph was shot and the time, too. This assumes that your camera is set to the right date and time, of course. It will tell you the f-stop, some aperture information, all this other stuff, focal length, which is useful sometimes. But this is the information I want to draw your attention to. Notice that the flash was fired, otherwise we would not get red eye. If you don't use the flash, you don't get red eye. And down here, notice it says no red eye reduction. I did not use the camera's red eye reduction. Now, turns out you can use your camera's red eye reduction. Most consumer level cameras have this option. What happens is it fires 2 flashes. Fires 1 strobe to make the pupils constrict. Doesn't take the photograph, just makes people's pupils constrict, and then shoots another photograph with flash. And the idea is because the pupils are constricted, you're not going to see red eye anymore. Well, 2 problems with using red eye from your camera. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this dialog box. One is dilated pupils look better than pinpoint pupils. So big dilated eyes look great. Second is when you're shooting kids especially, or animals or any of that kind of stuff, if you have 2 flashes go off, it's very possible you're going to lose the shot. So you might have 1 flash go off, they think they got the shot done, they run away, and then you take your picture, that kind of stuff. If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. It's very hard to keep them from moving. All right, so when I say better, Don't use your camera's red eye reduction. Just ignore it and use this wonderful red eye tool inside Photoshop instead. So here's what I want you to do. Make sure that you can see Max's eyeballs to start with here. This is my eldest son, the one over on the left-hand side. And then go over to this Band-Aid icon inside the toolbox, which is a spot healing brush. We'll see how that works later. Click and hold on it. That'll display a flyout menu of alternates, and go ahead and choose the final alternate tool, which is the red eye tool. This tool is designed to wipe out red eye. Let me give you a sense of how it works. I'm going to zoom in here on Max's left pupil, his right, and I'll just click inside the pupil. Notice what happens. Changes it from red to black. Done. That's all there is to it. If this pupil had had a highlight, it would leave the highlight in place. That's all there is to it. Very easy tool to use. In fact, you don't even have to be that careful. Check this out. You can click outside the pupil if you want to. As long as you get in the vicinity of the iris, you can click like right here. Or, I'll undo that, I could click down here. Or I could click over here. It's amazing. It still gets rid of it. Now, if you're clicking way off, like, I click over here by his nose, I'm not going to get the eye. And in fact, I just changed a little circular area down near his nostril. And that sort of gives you a sense of what's going on here. The red eye tool hunts down the closest area of red that's inside of an ellipse and adjusts it. Basically, it removes the saturation values, it darkens the colors, and so on. And that gets rid of red eye. So it's a very simple tool. But there are ways to adjust the performance of the tool. I'm going to go down here to this baby, to the cousin, and I'll click outside the eye, up at the top here, and you can see that things didn't go so well this time. It looks like kind of a comet. We've got the pupil turning black, though not quite all of it. We still have a hint of red down in this area here. And then we have sort of this trail of black going into the iris. Not quite so successful. How might we go about eliminating this particular red eye? Well, there's a few other different ways to work with this tool. One is to marquee around the pupil, around the area you want to change. And to draw this rectangular marquee, you just drag with the tool. So just drag around the portion of the eye that you want to change and release. That still, however, leaves a little bit of red. It does a good job of getting rid of that trail, but it still leaves actually an awful lot of red around the bottom of the pupil. So one way to work. Another thing I could do is adjust the numerical values up here in the options bar. Notice there's two values. One's called pupil size and one's called darken amount. Now, the pupil size isn't expressed as a number of pixels or something, as you might expect, but rather as a percentage. A percentage of what is the question? Well, it turns out to be a percentage of the iris. So Photoshop's going in there, it's trying to figure out what's what, it's looking for a circular area, and it notes there's the iris. And how much of that iris am I going to try to neutralize and change to a different color, change from red to black? Well, it doesn't want to go too big because if it neutralizes all of the iris, for example, it'll get rid of whatever the color of the eyes are, which is the good stuff. You don't want to get rid of the blue eyes, for example. However, in this case, it's not going as far as it should, so I am going to max this value out. I'm just going to go ahead and send it up to 100% in this specific case. And then I'll try dragging around the pupil again, and this time it does a better job. All right, I'm going to go ahead and restore that pupil size value to 50% like it was originally. I'll show you a little trick. To change the first option inside the option bar, all you have to do is press the Enter key to access that option, or the Return key on the Mac, and that will highlight that value, and then I'll just change it to 50%. Then you can tab inside the values inside the option bar. Now, the darken amount value does virtually nothing. Supposedly, it determines how dark this pupil is going to get, but I've experimented up, down, and sideways, and there's almost no difference between 1% and 100%. So you can experiment if you like. I'm just going to leave it alone. Press the Escape key to escape out. Now, the red eye tool is a delicious, wonderful, delectable tool. Works really well most of the time, but not all the time. Like, let's say this time I'll drag around this other pupil here, and that worked out pretty well. Interesting. Sometimes it doesn't. Let me try it now. Worked out great. All right, so it works out all the time, which is a splendid thing, except it didn't really on this eye, did it? Point is, sometimes it doesn't, and if you do run into situations where the tool doesn't quite do what you want it to do, and by that, in this case, I mean, it got rid of the red eye directly in the center of this eye, but it still leaves a lot of red color artifacting, we call it. What do you do about that? Well, I'll show you. There's a lot of different other approaches to red eye, but let me show you how I might go about correcting this specific problem. I'm going to get my brush tool here, just a standard paintbrush. Go ahead and select it. You can also get to it by pressing the B key. Now I've got a really monstrously big brush going at this point. Ooh, 250 pixels. That's left over from lesson 1 where I was brushing the Stanley Hotel. All right, I'm going to change this to a smaller size. And I did this by clicking this little down pointing arrowhead here. And then I changed the master diameter to a smaller value, 21 pixels. We'll see more about changing brush sizes and so on later. Or after you bring up this little mini palette here, you can select one of these predefined brushes down here. And notice they come in hard and soft varieties, so select whatever you want. We'll stick with 21. 21's good. Once you make a selection, you can hide the palette by pressing the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. And notice that my brush cursor not only looks like a circle, so I can see the brush size, it also has a little plus sign in the middle of it, so I can see the center. I did that with the Preferences command way back in lesson 3. Now, here's what you do. If you just start brushing with the paintbrush, you'll just paint in the foreground color, so I would paint in black, which is great for, you know, drawing mustaches, that kind of stuff, but not so good for solving the problem I'm wanting to solve right now, so I'll undo that. I'm going to do 2 things. First of all, I'm going to change the color in which I'm painting, because I don't want to paint with black in this case. I kind of want to restore the iris color. Let's lift a color from the iris. I want to lift some blue, and I'm going to do that by pressing and holding the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and clicking inside the iris. So I just changed it to a dark blue. It doesn't change very much. Now, if I start painting, I'll just paint with dark blue. I don't want that either. How do I go about just colorizing the eye? So replacing one color with another, I'd go to the Mode pop-up menu, click on this little down pointing arrow here, or click on the option name. And way down here at the bottom of the pop-up menu is an option that says Color, which is great for colorizing things, as its name implies. One of the foremost blend modes inside of Photoshop. And now I'll just paint over the eye, and it colorizes the eye in the iris color. Now, I've gone a little bit too far in this case. I kind of overpainted the eye, and the reason that it looks overpainted is because it's completely replaced all of the colors with a single set of hue and saturation values, actually. So whereas this eye contains an assortment of hue and saturation values, probably somewhere in 1,000 or more color variations, this eye now doesn't, and so it doesn't look natural anymore. Also, I painted a little bit into the skin, so I gave the skin a little bit of a bluish tone. All right, so a couple things I might do in this situation. One is I could undo the modification, I could lower the opacity value, and I could try painting again. Or, remember that command we saw that I combined along with the variations command to back off things? It works with brushes too. I could go up to the Edit menu and I could choose Fade Brush Tool in this case, to fade that brush stroke I just applied. And I'll go ahead and back it off dynamically. This way I can see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So I'll take it back to like 30%. Works pretty nicely, actually. Or, well, I might up it to, let's go with 40%. Something a little bit stronger. And now, this eye doesn't have as much red as it had before. That's a good thing. It looks pretty darn natural. That's a good thing. Has lots of hue and saturation variations. That's a good thing. In other words, it looks great. So combining the brush tool with the color mode, go ahead and paint at 100% opacity. If you go too far, you've got your friend, the fade command. And let me show you something else really great about the fade command. As long as I haven't done any operations since the fade command, it remembers my setting. So it remembers it's at 40%, so I could still change my mind. I could bring it up to 55% and click OK. As soon as I so much as click inside the image, maybe paint something different, or like switch to a marquee tool, make a selection, something along those lines, go up to the Edit menu, the Fade command is lost. So just remember the Fade command only applies to the very last operation. Now, Photoshop offers one more tool that allows you to recolor portions of an image, and this tool replaces one group of colors with a different group of colors. Let me show you how it works. Go ahead and click and hold on the brush tool icon to display a flyout menu of alternates and choose the final alternate, the color replacement tool. And I'm going to zoom out inside of this image here. Now let's say instead of replacing the red eye, for example, because this tool can replace red eye inside of an image, let's say I want to replace some other area of color. Let's start by replacing the color of Sammy's shirt over here. I'm going to do that by increasing the brush size for starters. So I'll click on the brush or on that down pointing arrow, either way. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the brush diameter. Notice that the palette looks a little different when you're using this tool. For what it's worth, you don't have that list of predefined brushes. Don't know why, just Photoshop playing games with you. So I'll go ahead and raise this diameter value to something pretty big. Actually 104, something like that. That's probably pretty good. And now we have a bigger brush. And I'm also going to select a different color. Let's select something that's pretty radically different. I'll just go ahead and choose swatches from the window menu. And I'm going to select a green. Something that's pretty different than any of the colors going on inside this image right now. And now I'm going to paint inside of Sammy's shirt. And as long as you keep that cross, that little plus sign that's at the center of the brush cursor, as long as you keep it inside Sammy's shirt, you should be good to go. You can even extend the brush out. Notice that the circle of the brush is going into his arm, but as long as you keep the plus sign in there, you're just fine. Isn't this working out nicely? Actually, pretty cool tool. Now, every once in a while, it will screw up like that. And if you move the plus sign into the other region, why, then you're really in trouble. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Now, big problem is that once I made a mistake with this brush, I had to undo the whole thing, didn't I? I couldn't undo just a little bit of that brush. And that's why I recommend if you're going to use this tool to just sort of drag little areas. Okay, just make sort of small adjustments at a time. And that way, if you do end up making a big mess of things, like so, you can undo just that little last brush stroke you applied. Okay, so I'll just keep brushing inside this. Now, there are a bunch of different options available up here inside the options bar. For example, by default, the mode is set to color. That's a good thing if we want to recolor elements inside the image. But I do want to demonstrate these two options right here, sampling and limits, both of which are extremely useful. Sampling decides what colors you're going to replace. And by default, it's set to continuous. And that means that as you drag, the brush is constantly reading the color that's directly underneath that plus sign. So it's finding that color and it's replacing it with the foreground color that you selected. So it's constantly updating on the march. And that means if you drag from here to here, it goes from deciding to replace green with green to deciding to replace red with green. If you don't want that to happen, if you want to give yourself a little more room to be sloppy, what have you, then you can change the sampling option to just sample once. You can also change it to background swatch. That just means whatever the background color is, which is white right now, that's all it's going to replace. Not very useful. Better, I think, is once. That way, it evaluates the color and replaces it on the fly. So for example, let me work inside the couch here. I'll go ahead and select an orange from the swatches palette. So I change my foreground color here in the toolbox to orange. And then I'll drag inside of the couch. And now notice, even if I go into Sammy's shirt, it doesn't change the color of the shirt. And that's because it's already decided it's only going to recolor red areas with this orange that I selected. Now, the other thing to know about is limits. Limits is currently set to contiguous. That means it's just going to try to replace adjacent pixels. Contiguous is basically Photoshop's word for adjacent. You can also skip pixels. You can skip over areas to paint non-adjacent areas by selecting discontiguous. Or if you're having problems painting outside of edges, like into poor cousin's head here, then you might want to try the Find Edges option, which does a better job of staying inside edges of the image. The only problem is it requires a few more brush strokes in places. That's actually okay because I'm trying to encourage you to use more smaller brush strokes anyway. All right, so experiment with those options. Tolerance just determines how many colors get changed at a time. You can have all the fun in the world with these things. Give it a shot, especially inside this image. There's a lot of different colors to work with. I'm going to go ahead and close the swatches palette. And here's our final effect after I get done painting the couch. Notice that I made my brush size a little bigger here. And I finished painting my son's shirt. And as a finishing touch, I'll just go ahead and paint the baby blue. Always a nice thing to do. And there we're done. You can see you can paint absolutely anything, change the color of anything inside of Photoshop using the red eye tool, the brush tool, and finally the color replacement tool here inside CS2.